Hi everyone. I'm just going to give you a bit of an overview of how the media are reporting and representing asylum seekers in Australia. So, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the media that we've seen over the last couple of years, sort of since and around the election of Tony Abbott. There have been heaps of studies that have assessed the state media exchange of meaning, and this meaning is often referred to as the propaganda model. So, this model says that the state exerts a powerful influence over media reporting because either the state is unable to exert an influence on the media as an economic benefactor, as a censor of information, and because the government is a major source of credible information. These relations influence what is emphasised and what is omitted in media reporting. The state is, of course, totally reliant on the media for the communications of its policies to the public, for mobilising support for special interests, and for confirming the legitimacy of the status quo. And as I'm going to show you, there are occasions when the media differentiate their opinions from those of the state and attain a greater degree of autonomy, enabling them to exert sort of an independent influence on policy and society and culture. But on this topic, these are quite limited. Now, news journalism, as I'm sure you know, is part of the what we would call the machinery of representation, which is enormously influenced in determining our knowledge of society and the policies that we're prepared to accept. Basically, the media are a significant driver of public opinion. So, in this presentation, I'm seeking to provide some introduction to how the Australian federal government portray asylum seekers, and I'll be using this lens to briefly show you how the media deal with the issue, and I guess more precisely I'm trying to explore here in this presentation the flow of meaning and description between the federal government and the media on issues of asylum seeking. So I'm showing you this image once again. If you've watched the narrator PowerPoint, you would have already seen this. This image was created and distributed in all of the national newspapers about this time the year before last. This was under the previous government who, during the election campaign, sought to get tough on asylum seekers as a way to shore up their election victory. Short clips were also made, as you would have seen if you looked at the narrated PowerPoint on Cloud Deacon, and like these posters, they were translated into a number of languages. The clips were heavily promoted in source countries. So I'm really interested in election coverage and the way that the media and the government work together during periods of elections, whether they're state or federal, to share information and to sell a particular side of the story. So this image here is from the 2013 federal election, and this is Tony Abbott and some of his colleagues standing in front of a billboard that was showing how many number of boats had arrived since Labor took over. Over the 5-week election campaign in 2013, both of the major parties, so the Labor Party and the Liberal Party, announced policies that would stop the boats and promised to deter the arrival of asylum seekers and punish those who did arrive. During the election, Abbott reintroduced former Howard stance that we will decide who comes into the country and the circumstances in which they come, and he frequently described his respect for the previous Conservative Prime Minister and the approach of that government toward asylum seeking. This included a pledge to reintroduce temporary protection visas and offshore detention. So Abbott introduced Operation Sovereign Borders upon his election to Prime Minister. This Operation Sovereign Borders was managed by a 3-star general, and it promised to stop the boat. So Australia had, with this change in policy, had begun to refer to the arrival of asylum seekers as if it were a military action, and we were now protecting our borders as if we were being invaded by a hostile party. The policy document itself states that the incoming coalition government will treat the border protection crisis as a national emergency and will tackle it with the focus and energy that an emergency demands. The coalition policy makes repeated reference to illegal arrivals and people smugglers and relies on this false distinction between what they term queue jumpers and genuine refugees. During the election campaign, the Abbott opposition used a travelling billboard that I've shown here to show a running tally of illegal boat arrivals since the Rudd government took office. This illegal talk continued right through the election campaign and is now in the lexicon of the Abbott government. So, for example, all staff in what was termed the Immigration Department, which is now the Department of Immigration and Border Protection, have been directed to refer to asylum seekers who arrive by boat as illegal maritime arrivals. So, as we all know, Abbott won the election, and this talk hasn't changed. This is a clip from Morning TV, and I want you to pay special attention to the images shown and the tagline used by the TV station.
We've obviously had a very serious problem on our borders for some years now, thanks to the errors of the former government. The incoming government, as soon as we are sworn in, will commence Operation Sovereign Borders. That will start making a difference from day one. My message to the people smugglers is that change has happened. Your game is up. You now face an Australian government whose will and determination is more than a match for yours.
Yeah.
Under the previous government, there was quite good flow of information from the Immigration Department through to the media and out to the public. Under the Abbott government, the once-weekly press conferences that were held at the beginning of the government to update the media on Operation Sovereign Borders were ceased at the end of 2013, with the former Minister for Immigration saying that he would hold press conferences on an as-need basis. This was described by the government as secrecy with purpose, and basically ended any discussion of actions that were not a cessation of boats. So this clip here that I'm about to show you reflects a flow of information from the PM on operational matters. Here he was asked about Australia's relationship with Indonesia, and I want you to just watch how informative it really is.
The important thing here for both our countries is to stop the boats, and I'm very pleased to note that today is the 50th day without an illegal boat arriving in Australia.
So here Abbott was asked about the conditions in detention centres. The interviewer was concerned that the media and the public weren't getting any information.
The vast majority of these people, as the former Foreign Minister Bob Carr said, are economic migrants. Let's remember that every single one of the recent arrivals has come to Australia through a series of other countries where they could easily have claimed asylum. They choose not to do that because they are seeking a migration outcome here in Australia. Now, I can absolutely understand why people living in a pretty tough place would want to come to a terrific country like Australia. We have an immigration program. We have a humanitarian and refugee program precisely because we do accept our obligations as an international citizen, but people have got to come the right way, not the wrong way. They've got to come in through the front door, not the back door. And my message to people, try to come in the back door. You will find it closed. We have, as I said, one of the world's more generous refugee and humanitarian programs. That will continue. We will never fail to be a good international citizen, but we've got to keep our borders secure and we've got to keep our country safe.
So Abbott here was asked about the situation of some women who, while in detention, were said to be attempting suicide. They were doing this because they were under the impression that their children would have a better chance of being resettled in Australia if they were unaccompanied.
We are going to stop the boats. We are going to maintain our policies. And look, this is not going to be a government which has our policy driven by people who are attempting to hold us over a moral barrel. We won't be driven by that.
So in February of last year, there were a number of riots in the detention centre on Manus Island. During one of these riots, an Iranian man, Reza Barati, was killed. there was a lot of media at this time, very little accurate information, and a lot of stories and innuendo and discussion and maybes. Given that Morrison had moved, the minister at the time, Morrison had moved to an approach of information sharing that was less informative, it doesn't really come as a surprise that little accurate information was coming out of the government and the media didn't really know what to report. Morrison was shifting the blame to the PNG government where Nauru is, where the incident took place. Basically, much of what Morrison said was around the protest of the asylum seekers and how I guess they kind of brought this on themselves. So you can see from these couple of quotes here from newspapers that Scott Morrison, the Minister for Immigration, really doesn't think that a person taking it upon themselves to protest while they're in detention. So following on from the death of Reza Barati, there were a number of public protests against the current immigration regime. And while the kind of left papers, so mostly the Sydney Morning Herald and the Age and the Guardian, took, I guess, a stance of trying not to be hysterical and trying to be factual about the reports that they protested, the right-wing media, so the Herald Sun, the Australian, the Daily Telegraph, made a point of highlighting the protesters as loonies and crazy people, and why would anyone go out there and march for an asylum seeker who, as Morrison had said, brought this upon himself. So I'm going to leave you with two clips that have been made by the current government. The first is the Minister for Immigration, and this has been made to show specifically in offshore detention facilities, and the second is the Army, the head of Operation Sovereign Borders, which you...
My name is Scott Morrison and I am the new Minister for Immigration and Border Protection in the new Australian government led by Prime Minister Abbott. You have been brought to this place here because you have sought to illegally enter Australia by boat. The new Australian government will not be putting up with those sorts of arrivals. If you have a valid claim, you will not be resettled in Australia. You will never live in Australia. If you are found not to be a refugee, you will remain in this camp until you decide to go home.
It is the policy and practice of the Australian government to intercept any vessel that is seeking to illegally enter Australia and safely remove it beyond our waters. If you travel by boat without a visa, you will not make Australia home. The rules apply to everyone: families, children, unaccompanied children, educated and skilled. There are no exceptions. Do not believe the lies of people smugglers. These criminals will steal your money and place your life and the life of your family at risk for nothing. The message is simple. If you come to Australia illegally by boat, there is no way you will ever make Australia home.